Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Thank you kindly for stopping by. I hope you had a great Easter break. Firstly, I'd like to thank Ian Donald of Nestle for dinner last night. We came back from Dubai and his wife was in town, and I had heard a lot about her, and I wanted to meet her, so we rushed across town. Fortunately, of course, the traffic wasn't too bad. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the Nespresso shop in the Dubai Mall, which was rather grand, I must admit. And I'll also mention that coffee prices, and I'll put up a coffee chart for the July 2014 contract, are up 80% this year. Bullish bets on coffee gained 2% to 38,143 contracts. Wages have more than doubled since mid-February as drought hampered crops in Brazil. So that's been an incredible story. But thanks to Ian and to Sue Donald, that was a very nice dinner. Macro thoughts: investment banking has a brilliant future, Rudloff said in an interview in Milan on April the 16th. The industry is looking at a golden decade. It isn't about trading with the firm's money, but about allocating capital and playing the intermediary by originating, packaging and distributing all types of securities, including derivatives, he said. Rudloff, referring to Ukraine and Russia, the attitude of Western powers toward the crisis, if you analyze it, what they're saying is that they'll wage war with different means, financially, economically, diplomatically, Rudloff said. If that's the intention, what has driven the last 25 years of development, that is globalization, will come to an end. And I thought that was an interesting point. Russian banks' access to short-term funding has gone, he said. They're relying on the central bank. Beyond Russia, a divided world could come if we force countries into isolation. Economic growth would take a huge hit. It's the biggest regression the world could make economically. When I started my career at Credit Suisse First Boston all those years ago, he was the CEO and a legendary figure, and that's the interesting points he's making in point of fact. Returning to my Easter break, we had a wonderful time in Dubai. I met my nephew Kabir, named after the fantastic and fabulous poet Kabir, and niece Mira. They're twins and just shy of a year, and the girls obviously met their cousins for the first time. It was a pleasure plugging into all the 21st century infrastructure, and we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. We didn't go up to the top and breathe the rarefied air at the top of the Burj Khalifa, but I took this photograph. I hope you can see it. And I must say I'm rather pleased with my camera on this new Samsung S5 that they very kindly encouraged me to use, and I'm sure I'm not using half of it. And when I've met them separately, I've said, I really enjoyed picking photographs, and really it's fantastic. But somebody taught me some other facilities in it, and I have yet to use it. I'll put up a photograph that I like from Dubai in 1991, and I was at dinner and I met a chap who actually settled in Dubai in 1977. So have a look at that 1991 photograph and then think of what it might have looked like in 77. We went to visit the Grand Mosque, which I'd visited previously when I'd gone with Kenya Airways to sort of seal the collaboration with Etihad, but I took this photograph as well with the camera, and it really is an eclectic mosque and very beautiful. It's got Iranian carpets, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I once characterized Kenya as a transit state, but in fact Dubai is the real transit state, a connection point in an interconnected century, and it's remarkable in that regard. That takes me to Victor Hugo, who says there is nothing like a dream to create the future. Think of that 1991 photograph, look at it today, and I think that's very true. Joe Biden was greeted by Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Deshetsya when he arrived in Kiev on Monday. said clearly that still remains pretty hot. Putin says the oil wars with Russia will make the West bleed. That's on Global Research if you want to have a look at that. Interesting piece by Badra Kumar, who says China is calibrating a distance from Russia over this situation. He says from the guarded wording of reports and the low-key media coverage, as well as the body language of as such by both sides regarding the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's working visit to Beijing last Tuesday. China apparently is showing reluctance to be drawn into Moscow's current tensions with the West over Ukraine. President Xi Jinping stressed the importance of high-level exchanges between the two countries after that meeting with Lavrov and the strengthening of collaboration in international and regional affairs. But Xi merely exchanged views with Lavrov on the crisis in Ukraine. And on the 31st of March, I said that this Crimea referendum business is a geopolitical conundrum for China. The problem being, if you allow that periphery states, surely Crimea is one, can vote via a referendum, then you will definitely see a whole lot of China peel off real quick, from Tibet to Taiwan to Xinjiang. So they can't really support the situation there. I'll put up that photograph by Dracuma was referring to between Lavrov and Xi Jinping, where he was saying that body language was poor. I came across this photograph of Vladimir Putin meeting the newly promoted top officers from various branches of the Russian armed forces and interior ministry. Interesting article in Foreign Affairs about how China and America see each other and why they are on a collision course, which I tend to agree with. And then I haven't read the book, but there are a lot of reviews of Robert Kaplan's latest book, Sea Change, Asia's Cauldron. Kaplan starts out from some basic economics. More than half of the world's annual merchant fleet tonnage, including 4/5 of all the oil burned in China, passes through the South China Sea. This commerce, Kaplan says, has turned that waterway into the throat of the Western Pacific and the Indian Oceans, the mass of connective tissue where global sea routes coalesce, investing in straits, shoals, and islands with extraordinary strategic significance. At the heart of Kaplan's book is a striking analogy that aims to explain why this will mean in the 21st century. China's position vis-à-vis the South China Sea, he suggests, is akin to America's position vis-à-vis the Caribbean Sea in the 19th and the early 20th centuries. Kaplan is saying between 1898 and 1914 the United States defeated Spain and dug the Panama Canal. This allowed Americans to link and dominate the trade of the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, transforming the meaning of geography. It was domination of the greater Caribbean basin, Kaplan concludes, that gave the United States effective control of the Western Hemisphere, which in turn allowed it to affect the balance of power in the Eastern Hemisphere. In a rather similar way, he suggests the South China Sea now links the trade of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Consequently, were China to ever replace the US Navy as the dominant power in the South China Sea, or even reach parity with it, this would open up geostrategic possibilities for China comparable to what America achieved upon its dominance of the Caribbean. Because of this, the South China Sea is on the way to becoming the most contested body of water in the world. But of course, the biggest difference is that in the 1890s, the revisionist power in the Caribbean, the United States, was militarily stronger than Spain, the status quo power, whereas in the 2010, the revisionist power in the South China Sea, China, is militarily weaker than America, the status quo power, which is a fair point. Very interesting. Looking forward to reading it. I'll put up a photograph of an American warship in Da Nang for joint US and Vietnamese naval exercises in 2011. that was posted on the New York Times, and I wrote about this on the 2nd of December 2013 when I spoke about the pivot to Asia bearing its fangs. And I said, I see the pivot to Asia as the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre, and then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery, and Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. Therefore, you can understand why the Chinese are not keen on the Crimea geopolitical rationale. I was speaking about Zbigniew Brzezinski, saying the US probably feels it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, and given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. And therefore I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage, and I think that's a key point. One might even posit that calming down the Iranian front allows the US better to concentrate its energies on the pivot to Asia. I refer to the air sea battle concept, the blinding attack, but I think what it's really about is about this phrase called distant blockade operations. It's about exerting naval power, because via that exertion you can choke off China via these choke points, which was being referred to by Kaplan. And from all of this, it took me back to this Dr. Strangelove, the Strangelove effect. When Major T.J. King Kong goes toe-to-toe with the Ruskies and flies his rogue Bf-52 nuclear bomber to a target in Russia, it's left to General Buck Turgidson to reassure the president. Strike first, says the general. And you got no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops. President Merkin Murphy, I will not go down in history as the greatest mass murderer since Adolf Hitler. General Turgidson, perhaps it might be better, Mr. President, if you were more concerned with the American people than with your image in the history books. The genius of Stanley Kubrick's film is that it accurately represents the Cold War's lunacy and dangers. Brilliant movie. I'll put up a photograph of Peter Sellers from that movie. I'll also put up a photograph of an elderly man and woman making prayer offerings at the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo. Abe, of course, sent the offering in a private capacity recently. Rebels have slaughtered hundreds of civilians when they seized the South Sudan oil hub of Bentu, which is another choke point in the South Sudanese economy, by the way. But unfortunately, very horrible events. They seized the town of Bentu. They hunted down men, women, and children who had sought refuge in a hospital, mosque, and Catholic church. And then, of course, in reaction, after the rebels seized Bentu, Dinka residents of Boortown and Jonglei attacked a UN base on Thursday, where about 5,000 people, mostly in oil, were sheltering. And then there was that big fracas. So it's hardly any improvement, significant deterioration. And I don't see how either side wins this. And actually, Machar might be on the front foot now, notwithstanding what has happened now, because he's now got his hand on the tiller. Plane hunt yields no debris as search enters last zone. This is the MH370. No physical trace of the Malaysian airline system jet has been found as the search enters its 46th day, the longest hunt for a missing passenger plane in modern aviation history. I do not believe the plane is anywhere near where they are looking. And I go back to Thomas Pynchon in Gravity's Rainbow when he said, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, i.e. looking in the completely the wrong place, they don't have to worry about the answers. Saudi Arabia targets Khartoum. This is Africa Confidential. The National Congress Party support for Egypt's Muslim brothers is exacting a heavy political and economic cost. Financial sanctions on Sudan by Saudi Arabia and the UAE are a political warning shot. The immediate targets are Khartoum's backing for Egypt's banned Muslim Brotherhood and its ever-strengthening relationship with Iran. Riyadh officials who monitor money laundering and terrorist financing issued a circular on 4th March banning all dealings with Sudan's banks. Days later, finance officials in the UAE announced their own ban on dealings with Sudan, which makes our president's state visit to Qatar. Qatar is a renowned backer of the Muslim Brotherhood, an interesting geopolitical move. I like this image. San Francisco design firm Stamen teamed up with NASDAQ to visualize the frenzy of automated trading. And this image is of 1 minute of bids and offers on 8th of March 2011. Currency markets, Euro 137.94, dollar index has crept higher. In fact, is at the highest level since April the 8th at 79.96, Japanese yen 102.64. Japan's export growth slowed to its weakest in a year. The dollar's had a 7-session gain against the yen, longest winning streak since October 2012. Swiss franc 0.8848, the pound 167.92. Aussie 0.9352, gained 0.3% from yesterday when it touched 0.9316, which was the weakest since April the 8th. India rupee 60.699, and this is the lowest since March 24. But I think we're going to get a decisive result. You might not like Narendra Modi. I certainly think there are issues with him, but he's going to win decisively, as I've said for quite a while. South Korean won 1039.15, the rial 223.79, Egyptian pound back over 7 after a long time when it remained below it. South African rand 1049.68, the offshore one hit a fresh 14-month low of 6.2335. Chinese currency has lost 2.84% against the dollar since the start of the year. Concerns that China is slowing down. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart, but bear in mind what's driving this is US 2-year yields, which are now trading at 3-year highs of 0.469%, and that's definitely supporting it against the yen. Euro dollar 137.94. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that as well. But bear in mind, Draghi's out there jaw-jawing, keeping a lid on the euro, and doing it rather successfully, as he's done most things. Gold 1287.18. I think it could break down extremely sharply at any moment, and that we will see a $1,000 print sometime this year. Crude oil 103.49. It's expensive, but it could trade as high as 105.50 if something serious breaks out in Ukraine. But it's toppy at these levels. Copper, I'll put up a 1-year chart. I think this is a sell as well. In particular, copper has a high correlation to China GDP, and I think that's slowing down faster than most people have factored in. I like this image of past the Courvoisier that I found on Reuters. I'll put up a photograph of the shark that I took. Hannah and I had a lovely time at the aquarium, Dubai Mall, and I took this photograph of a shark. Not cheap to buy by any stretch of the imagination. Rather expensive these days. Sub-Saharan Africa, military spending in Africa increased by 8.3% in 2013, reaching an estimated $44.9 billion. Angola increased its spending by 36% in 2013 to overtake South Africa as the largest military spender in Sub-Saharan Africa. I like this image that Calestis tweeted, Africa's exports to China. I'll put it up. And then I was reading an article which says, in reality, Africa accounts for only a tiny percentage of China's overall foreign economic activities. China's investment in and trade with Africa represents 3% and 5% of its global investment and trade, respectively. The South African all shares up 6.03% this year and very close to a record. Dollar versus rand, I'm quite constructive on that. I think we'll go towards 10. We're at 10.49.565, ahead of going to 11, but let's keep an eye on it. The Egyptian pound, as I said, popped over 7. Egyptian stock market back on the up 20.33% this year, the best performing stock market in Africa. And it's back over 8,000, it's over 8,100. The Nigerian all share down 3.39% in 2014. Bear in mind that well over 1,000 people have been killed, with some estimates of as many as 2,000 in the Boko Haram-related violence in 2014. The last note we heard was from the Boko Haram leader Abu Bakr Shekau, who in a video address claimed or said to Goodluck Jonathan, "We are in your city. We are the ones that carried the attack out in Abuja," he said. And then Africa Confidential is saying, Nigeria buying while there is blood on the streets, which is another valid point. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 6.02% in 2014, but has come off quite a bit since hitting a record high earlier in the year. And of course, it's all about currency. The cedi slumped nearly 20% against the dollar last year and has lost a further 17.8% since January. And I wrote about this when I said the open question is whether Ghana is in the cockpit or whether the markets will simply elbow the government aside. And saying that Ghana is a near perfect harbinger of what can go wrong when you front-load your recurrent expenditure in the expectation that revenues are a rising tide forever. Between 1994 and 2010, Dakar house prices soared by 256%, the Senegalese National Statistics Agency said, regarded as a safe haven in turbulent West Africa. Very good interview with Vimal Shah of Bidco by Katrina Manson in the FT. When Vimal and his elder brother took their ambitious idea for manufacturing consumer goods to potential backers in 1985, they could not get a loan. Unilever will kill you, one banker told them. Since then, Unilever has sold several brands to them, and international rich lists put them top of the charts. That's something that's stuck in my hard disk, says Mr. Shah. Start small, aim big, he says. He's now chief executive of Bidco, which turned over $500 million last year. Talking about the introduction of soap and various challenges, saying it's very systemized. Their father, 82, is always around working in his new office. To him, it's very clear retirement means waiting for my funeral. He doesn't want to retire ever. And then saying, the fire still burns. A very interesting piece. I did an interview with him last year after the Ready for Takeoff conference. I'll put up the link for that. Do have a look at it. Crisis looms as the rural economy is hit by a dip in cash crop prices. The latest official data shows that farm gate prices of milk, tea, coffee, sugar, coffee is coffee is going to take off any moment. Dropped by more than 20% in the first quarter of the year. Producer price of milk fell 25%. Farm gate price of sugarcane dipped 28.6%. Tea prices weekly auction dipped by nearly 30% from last year's peak. I think we've crossed the nadir in prices for most of the farm economy. Coast parks lose out in Easter holiday tourism boom, saying there was a big shift away from the coast inland. And the coast, I'm afraid, is very, very soft. And I wrote about this in 2012 when it was Sheikh Abu Droga. The week before last, we had driven through Savo West, exited the park deep near the Tanzania border, driven to Diani, and thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. In fact, the phrase Halcyon Days, a period of calm, often nostalgic, Halcyon Days of yore, Halcyon Days of youth, best described that week. We saw elephants in the morning, and in the evening we were walking barefoot on the beach. I met a fellow named Volker who told me that if I came back in February, he would take me swimming with the whale sharks, and I thought to myself, this is a blessed place. If we marketed it right, the whole world will want to come. Then last week, on the 27th of August, Abu Droga Mohammed was shot on the always busy Bamburi Road, not far from Pirates. This proved the spark that ignited a tinderbox. I watched events unfold with trepidation. We now exist in a 24/7, always-on world, and for a moment it looked like Mombasa was morphing into Waziristan. and a tsunami of travel advisories would be winging their way through the air. Nothing much has changed, you will recall from then. Equity targets retail business with 300,000 smartphones. Interesting. Will from next month issue 300,000 smartphones to retailers to facilitate cashless transactions and deepen use of the lender's new ATM cards that allow tap-and-go payments. The top-tier lender said that customers would tap their Equity MasterCard cards on the high end of the market mobile phones with contactless payment technology based on near-field communication to make retail payments. They've made a move into that mobile space. Quite interesting. Equity Bank share price is up 6.54% in 2014. They issued better than expected Q1 earnings. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to have a dive into those earnings. By the end of 2015, with all our plants operational, ARM will be the largest cement and clinker manufacturer in East Africa, Pradeep Panrana told Business Beat. Their ARM plant will be strategically situated along the Tanga Dar es Salaam highway and is a few months away from being fully operational. I'll put up a link for their share price, and they had some margin compression at the full year earnings, but they're going to have significant margin expansion once the clinker facility comes on stream. The Nairobi All shares up 8.3863%, and that's a record as of this morning. The NSC 20, however, is down 0.1% in 2014. That divergence is informed by the fact that Safaricom in particular has been dragging up the All share. Nakumatt is hoping to have a Tanzanian court order barring its takeover of ShopRite withdrawn this week, an official said. Good to be back. Thank you for stopping by. I am grateful that you come and listen to my musings.